Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back from the summer break. And I think we're going to probably see a lot of all of you over the coming session. And we look forward to our conversations. I am going to start with Richard Heaton, if I may. Can you tell me what the government policy is on the use of 0845 and 0844 numbers?
Thank you, Mrs. Hodge. There has been for the last 3 years no central government policy or guidance or activity from the Cabinet Office on this subject beyond the guidance that you saw, which dates back from 2010. That's for all sorts of reasons. The Cabinet Office has been doing lots of things in adjacent fields, but we haven't been playing in this game, and there's been no central policy activity at all on this subject.
So you don't have a central government policy?
That's the position up to date. This has been a really very interesting and useful report, and I have discussed it with my ministers and with colleagues, and there is certainly, I think the case is made for there to be a greater central involvement in this subject, and so we recognise the case for the Cabinet Office to step back into this field, which we were in until 2010, and get some stuff together, talk principally to the two big departments to my right who run 80% of the telephony, but also the other departments, to make sure that there are principles that are understood, that there is guidance that's understood, that there is a light touch monitoring regime, and so on, and that is what we have just started to do. So the case is made so far as we're concerned, and that's what we will do.
Do you think it's appropriate to charge for what is ultimately a public service?
I'm not a telephony expert and I don't have government policy at my fingertips, but just my observation is that, and I'm sure this is agreed by two departments to my right, that for vulnerable citizens accessing public services, it's inappropriate for them to pay a substantial charge. Whether that equates to, in all circumstances, free, and what that means in the view of the complexity of the market is a different question, but as a matter of principle, taxpayers should not pay a double taxation on telephony to
telephone tax is what John Healey, who's been the great campaigner on this issue.
Mr Healey and other campaigns have made that case extremely well.
And I have to say, Nick Hurd himself said in a debate that was called on this that I sense there is frankly a substantial problem. Do you agree with him?
Yes, and he's my minister, and he went on to say that... That's a good line. I'm very happy to quote my minister. He went on to say that as soon as the NA report was out, and it wasn't out then, we'd be looking at it and assessing the case for a Cabinet Office involvement. And we've assessed it, and there is a case for involvement, and we're going to get stuck in. We're going to rely heavily on the expertise of the big departments, because I'm not a telephony expert, and I don't have a telephony team in my department on this at the moment, but we will certainly bring the departments together. We already started last week, and get some central...
So do you agree with what the NAO has put in on page 12, para 1.2? All other things being equal, the government should aim to offer telephone numbers with low tariffs, in particular to ensure that vulnerable people are not prevented or deferred from accessing services.
That looks absolutely right to me, yeah.
Okay, so when we looked at HMRC, we uncovered that Cable and Wireless were making $1 million. I think actually it was after our report you uncovered in further inquiries from Cable and Wireless that Cable and Wireless were making £1 million out of the telephone deal with HMRC on the use of 0845 or whatever 0844 numbers. That's a bit of a racket, isn't it?
I don't have knowledge of that contract
Well, you should have done, to be honest, to prepare today, because the genesis of this report partly arose out of our inquiry into when we looked at HMRC, when was it, 6 months ago, January. I mean, I would have thought, as with overall government responsibility, you ought to know. We looked at that, and then I had representations from John Healey, and I had experience myself in my own constituency. It's a racket. It's a racket.
I confess that we're late to this game, and that we will come in and help departments achieve a position which makes sense for particularly vulnerable consumers, and make sure that they are not ripped off by telephone charges. We've got an interest in making that happen.
So can you give us a time frame at least? I mean, I welcome that. Okay, we welcome that, and it's good to see an NAO report being taken seriously.
Yes. I don't think...
But what's the time frame? I will come to you in a minute, because I was going to ask you the next bit of question.
I think the bulk of the work can be done really very quickly. I mean, something like 6 to 8 weeks to work out what the principles are, where there is a
6 to 8 weeks. So by the time you have our report in your response to it, you will be able to set out a new government approach, and hopefully underpinned by a policy to the charging of use of high charge phones.
I mean, maybe that the basic principles will come out quicker than that. So my difficulty is that before we get stuck into this, I don't know how big the divergent issues are and how knotty they will be, and whether we'll need to take them to ministers and so on and so forth. But the basic principles ought to emerge very quickly, I think.
And do you accept the Ofcom research in this report that customers are deterred from using phones because of higher charges, and therefore it'll cost government more because they're more likely then to visit the diminishing number of HMRC officers or the Job Centre Plus, and that'll cost more.
No reason to disagree.
You accept that?
No reason
the
to disagree.
Research.
No reason to disagree with that.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't seen the analytics, and I've no reason to disagree with it. But I mean, I can't sort of sign up to it. But it sounds.
Then can I ask
plausible
a
to
little
me.
bit of both of you, Robert, Deborah, and then I'll pass it on to. Why have you taken the decision to use 0845 and 0844 for universal credit and PIP, then, given all this background?
So maybe it's worth just making one observation to start with. I mean, people got into 0845, both my department and HMRC, at the time when that was the way in which local rate charge calls, could still be networked around the country. So just to be really clear about why we use them in the first place, we are both running very large nationwide networked operations, and the only way you can actually get the calls moved around between Lowestoft and Exeter and Warrington is by having access at that level into the BT system.
I mean, I have to say, sorry to interrupt you, I hate doing this, but I've got it here. The report that we should all move to 03 was a report done by the guy who was in it.
I'm partway through the answer, which might help you on why.
Yeah, but it was a long time ago.
Yes, it was. But
December 2006, David Varney's report.
Yeah. Okay. So if I can continue then. So I mean, if you are running a large national network set of contact centres, you need to be playing in that level of telephony, which historically has come with 0845 numbers. You're right to say that 03 numbers were then introduced back in the time you talked about.
2006, 7 years ago.
And at the time, and it remains the case today, it is not the case that 0845 is universally better for all possible customers under all circumstances. Okay, so in our world, and we said we would do this in the report, and we've done it. We've run a sample during the course of August, where we asked our customers to say, do you know what your package is? Do you know whether this would be better for you on 03 or not? A couple of things came out of it. First of all, actually, many more claimants than you would imagine do know what their package is on, which is not surprising because they have a lot of cash. Secondly, actually, it became very apparent that it is broadly the case that if we were to switch from 0845 uniquely to 03, about a third of the claimants would see no difference. About a third, typically on mobiles, would make a big benefit, and about a third, typically pensioners calling from landlines, would see a disbenefit. So the position that the department has been in for a while is to say, well, actually, I've got pluses and minuses here, and by the way, there are costs to the taxpayer in going to 03, because 0845 I am not paying for, 03 I have to pay half a pence a minute for. Now,
can I just clarify on that? So overall, those numbers are numbers that I recognise in terms of the breakdown of people who would be better off or worse off or about the same in terms of the charge that they pay. But what it doesn't take account of is actually the scale of
so I'm coming to that.
Difference.
I'm coming to that. So I'm trying to tell the story. So first of all, I need to be playing either at 0845 or 0345 to make national contact centres work. Secondly, historically to date, we have looked at the proportions of people who are better off and worse off and found actually they're
but the report says that research was flawed.
Well, the report says that with the growth of free minutes, which has been a growth over the last few years, there is a net benefit here. This is the net benefit which the NAO score at 14 million. We've done some more sums on the back of our sample. It's a bit smaller than that, but the bottom line is it's actually a 20 million benefit for mobile customers, and it's 6 million disbenefit for pensioners and other landline users. So the question that we need to wrestle with is actually, what should you do in that respect? Now, to date, we have been constrained by the fact that actually I've got budgets for running this department which are declining, so what should I do? Our conclusion is, because we've made such big strides in respect of some of the costs of the 0800 calls, those are the free ones, my department's the only one that's negotiated genuinely free calls for mobiles, because we've got so many people now claiming JSA online, because we've stopped doing the crisis loans, because we've got people putting vacancies onto Universal Job Match not ringing up, we've actually got a very sharp reduction in the money we were otherwise paying mobile telephony providers for 0800. which in a sense means I can now in a position to come back to the committee and say, actually, we will introduce 0345 numbers for DWP services, which is a change from where we are at the moment, because even within the declining budget, because of the productivity and policy changes I'm making, I could afford to do that. So our position now is I will offer 0345. I'll do it exactly as Ruth has done in parallel with 0845 numbers. It leaves a question, both for us and no doubt the committee will want to reflect on, because otherwise we're all going to be back here in 2 years' time, whether you actually positively want me to disadvantage landline users of 0845 into the future, or whether actually you would prefer us to have two numbers with the inherent complexity. So a long answer, but
well, I mean, I welcome that response. You know, that's a welcome. So the rethink is welcome. In the end, we're not a policy committee, as you well know.
No, but you will be making recommendations, so I thought I'd leave the thought with you.
But I mean, my line would be on all this is always simplicity, and I think we're all being too clever by half, and that's how you end up with systems which just disbenefit too many people.
And one reason why I think we may well end up in just 03 is that if Ofcom's proposals actually see the light of day, and they're supposed to be doing shortly, it's not impossible that the 0845 position for the major landline supplier will change. I don't know. But if it were, it would eat into this disbenefit, in which case we just stick with 03.
Well, we welcome that, and also, I mean, I noticed from the report that it's you are the only ones to have negotiated this deal over free phones, and I was going to ask Ruth Owen, why aren't you doing the same?
Well, our policy, as you know, is we were moving from 0845 to 03, and as the NAO report draws out, there's a balance to be struck between the cost to the customer, the cost to the department, and the cost to the taxpayer of subsidising free calls to people. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Aren't your customers all taxpayers? Apart from big companies?
Indeed.
Apart from Vodafone, apart from Vodafone, actually.
I'm not responding to that. But the cost of the exchequer, let me put it that way, of subsidising free calls. So we've taken the balance of the analysis that we've done, which said it's better actually for end users, customers, to use 03. It's a better service, we think, for us to offer that service. So many now of the plans that people are on actually make 03 numbers free to call in your 3 minutes in your package, that we don't think a move to 08 at the expense of the exchequer is worthwhile.
Well, you haven't negotiated a deal, though. I mean, what DWP has done, and it's a question to you, but it's also a question for Richard, is, you know, there's an example. This is absolutely typical of so much we see. There is an example, actually, of very good, excellent practice, which gives a free service to needy citizens and saves the taxpayer money at the same time. Why on earth can't we replicate that across other areas, particularly where we know that it's vulnerable citizens on low income who are likely to be using the phones?
Could I just help here? Because, I mean, it is the case that we've negotiated that, but within the Ofcom proposals, there are new, even lower rates that they propose to charge the users of 0800 numbers, HMRC and us, even than the money that we're currently paying the mobile
They're
companies.
proposing to charge.
Yes, yes. So Ofcom is proposing to limit the amount which a service provider like us has got to pay for offering an 0800 number. So whereas at the moment I'm paying a particular number, it's going to be nearly a third of that. So it will be more in scope in a hard-pressed department to have an 0800 number that's genuinely free, because actually that's the way it's going to be in future.
Now, very final question really to Rich, and then I'll pass to Fiona, who's waiting, is we're seeing progress here. I mean, I was shocked. If you look at Appendix 4, there's a list of the people who use the higher rate lines for vulnerable groups. And there's a lot of shocking. I mean, under Robert Devereux, I think probably it was the crisis loan one, that and the bereavement service line. But I was equally shocked to find victim support being charged at 0845, and students. You only ring the student hotline if your money's not come through. That's the only reason. You're not going to ring them. Every student will be using a mobile phone, and for the student loans company to tell us they can't afford to move off 0845 because it gets them £1 million income is just unacceptable tax on people who are a very vulnerable and poor stage in their lives. just not on.
I agree. Annex 4 doesn't read well, doesn't read comfortably. I imagine
So you're going to tell the student loans company they've got to change?
as I say, we're going to get some work going immediately on this to make sure that best practice, and I'm sure these departments between them have got best practice or are very close to it. As Robert describes, he's about to go across to O3. Make sure that best practice is followed across government. I mean, of course, that's what. In the light of this report, we couldn't do otherwise.
Okay, so just a final thing. Okay, so student loans company is an example of where it's outrageous practice. I think the victim support was the other one that hit me. Bereavement service helpline is another one that hit me. This is all outside Robert Deborah's DWP ones, where I think there were a number, but those are shocking things. So can we, in concluding our inquiry, be assured that in your review, accepting the main tenet of this report, you from Cabinet Office will insist that these departments instruct their NDPBs or whatever they are to drop these outrageous higher level call lines?
I would love to say absolutely. The only thing I have to say is I simply haven't. What I haven't done yet is pick up the phone to these service providers and say what is going on here. That's the only bit I haven't done. So there may be something lurking here which is completely beyond my sight. But on the face of it, we'll have to go in that direction.
Well, the student-owned company tell us they want the million. In the body of the report, they've just said they can't afford not to have the £1 million.
Just to clarify on that, so the £1 million is the cost of lost revenue share and the cost of making the change, but there's no other reason other than cost for not changing that number.
So you're going to make sure that they absorb that.
I'll give you as close to a guarantee as I can. As I say, I haven't spoken to them, and I don't know what their response to this challenge will be. But we certainly want to achieve consistency.
And you will also think through a system of sanctions. It's an interesting example. I mean, Cabinet Office are trying to get consistency on data. They're trying to get consistency on a whole range. MPA are trying, the Major Projects Authority are trying to get much tougher control. And this, I know it's a sort of, it matters a lot, particularly to poor people. I'll come back to my constituents and GPs later on in the hearing. But it's a lot of money. If you're talking about the highest rate of 40p, it costs one of my constituents £30 to make an appointment for her 30-year-old disabled son with a GP. I don't know how many calls she had to make, but that's a shocker.
I absolutely don't take it lightly at all.
But there's no sanction. And I can tell you, I've been pursuing this since last February, there's no sanction.
There is no
nobody
control in place.
at the moment can force the GP to shift to a landline, or at least two alternatives.
No, there is no control in place at the moment, and the case may be made out in the egregious instances for there to be some sort of control or sanction. I don't know what it would look like, and I haven't spoken to the inverted commas offenders, but there may be some case for some tougher central intervention. Or people complain on Twitter, which is a digital channel, and that seems to be quite effective. So I wouldn't necessarily say that complaints must be telephony and access must be digital. I think digital can cover both, although the complaints bit is certainly probably more difficult.
Okay, well, I'll come to the service departments in a moment about
We won't make policy up as you go along then.
the difference between an inquiry and paying substance. But just to finish with Mr. Heaton, does the Cabinet Office, does your Minister have any views or will espouse any views on the issue about private companies that are providing a public service and providing a hotline? So that, for example, the NHS increasingly, GPs have always effectively been private contractors, and we've heard from the Chair, and I have locally GPs that have premium rate numbers. Energy companies, arguably, they're providing a public service even though they're private companies. There's all sorts of bodies like A4E, we know we've had here, Serco. These are bodies that provide public services entirely funded by the taxpayer. Will the Cabinet Office be setting out any rules for them and their use of numbers?
I can't speculate on that. You asked me whether I have a ministerial line on that. I don't know.
So I should write to the Minister?
I think the committee will take a view. If it's a public service, whoever it's provided from, you have to have a consistent approach. That's really, doesn't matter, the provider doesn't matter.
We've been sharing anecdotes, but I remember some time ago when I was caring for somebody and ringing the care agency, who told me they couldn't provide emails. and having to ring, trying to ring during the day, and they were a public service provider, but they were contracted, and it was very, very difficult to reach them. And when you're a working carer, that's quite challenging. So it was just a real, I'm sure we've all got examples of times when we've had to try and contact an organisation, and my constituents all the time now, dealing with private bodies providing a public service.
Funded through the tax.
Funded by the taxpayer, but not able to, having to ring a premium rate number, or perhaps not being able to get through easily even on the telephone at all. So it's actually more than just what's happening in government from the point of view of our constituents.
I would expect the principles that we'll be looking at in the cross-departmental group that I've mentioned to cover the provision of services, whether directly or through contracted parties, but beyond that I can't quite speculate.
Okay, well that's very helpful, and certainly I'm sure myself and others on the committee will follow. I just want to pick up on an interesting point that Mr. Deborah, you raised. It's about how the original setup had been on the basis of a certain financial understanding or regime about, I think it was 03 numbers, and now you're moving, sorry, which way I come around, you're moving now, 03 to 08 to 03, and then you're moving to 03, but you seem to indicate that the charging policies of the telephone companies, and with all this competition, means that the goalposts are shifting. Am I right? Was I right in that understanding?
Yes, so I mean, I'll try to get this accurate, but I mean, when 03 numbers were introduced, our first calculation of how much it might all cost the organisation to pay for each of those 03 minutes was going to take us maybe £10 million worth.
10 million?
We now think it could be a factor of 10 less than that. Right?
You think it could be what?
9 million, that's what, so 9 million.
No, a factor of 10 less means 1 million. Right? And that's because actually the market has changed in terms of the prices they've been changing.
Okay,
so
which brings me to my point then about how possible it is for a huge machine like the DWP with all your complex systems, similarly with HMRC and for Mr. Heaton, the whole of government, and then the private companies that provide the public services to keep up to speed with these changes, and how fast, if tomorrow I was a telephone, Ofcom said it's going to be done differently, how fast could you change, and would this be something, so Richard Heaton, that government would push for, so that you're always pursuing the best, cheapest deal for the customer?
So one of the things that the report talks about is whether departments have policies for their use of numbers, and they noted that we both do. One of the policies that I inherited when I arrived as a policy actually said, whatever we have needs to be sustainable, because I can't be chopping and changing a £300 million business every 5 minutes. Right? Now, it would be the case that mobile phones will think of tariffs faster than I can have breakfast. And so I need to have something which is sort of broadly stable. Now, the good news about 03, at the level of pricing which is now at, with my ability to pay for it, is actually, I hope that there's a sort of constitutional settlement in the industry which actually gives me some advantage. It's going to lock the call of these phones only to public services and charities. And so I hope that it's not going to move away from it, but I'm not going to promise to follow every twist and turn of the
I would imagine it'd be difficult.
Madness.
But so it just means that things could change at any...
They could, and we could be back here again. Yes.
And then
In terms of Robert Deborah on the DWP, first of all, obviously the fact that you've gone down the route of an 0800 number is something which I think the committee will applaud. But you did mention obviously that we had to take into account at all times the total cost of your telephone services and the top cost of calls. And yet from the report on page 31 it indicates that the cost of the 0800 free calls for mobile users is about £5 million per year. So therefore, spreading that out to all of these premium rate numbers that you still use, would that be prohibitively expensive?
Well, it's one of the other policies that was written down in the policy document that you referred to was a positive choice on our part to make 0800 numbers available for, principally for claiming. Right? We have lots of other calls, and we have not to date concluded that there's enough spare cash provided in our budget settlements to make everything free. So the conversation we're having today is about actually making sure that 0845 moves to 0345, which advantages a lot of mobile customers. Now that seems to me to be a sensible step. Turning it all on for free would be, further expense on top of all of that, which is not a step which I think we would necessarily take lightly.
But in terms of the cost then, is the £5 million more or less the cost of the 0800 offer then? Because it's mentioned on page 31 as being the cost.
Yeah, so let me just check that, because I think that is actually the cost. Let me just, what page was it? I'm sorry.
It's on page 31 and I'm just...
Sorry to clarify, so the figure 11 relates to a decision DWP took to negotiate for mobile callers
So that,
to have free calls to 0800. So it's for that element. It's not
that's the envelope within which we are making payments to mobile companies to make sure 0800s are genuinely free. That's a thing for which we get some credit. That is not the sum total of all the 0800 costs, because you also have to pay BT for 0800 over and above what you pay the mobiles. So the total cost of an 0800 number to the taxpayer is more than the number in figure 11.
And that's the point I was trying to get at, really, because when you initially stated that the cost of the calls was comparatively low in terms of the overall cost, if we're looking at £5 million being not even the total cost of this development, then obviously the cost of calls does become a big issue then, doesn't it?
Well, from memory, the call itself, the 0800 bit plus this top-up that we're paying, is of the order of £20 million a year. So £20 million is a non-trivial sum for our departments, and so I'm not going to promise I can just turn that off and make it zero. By putting in 5 million, we've at least mean that there are genuinely free calls for mobiles. That number will be cheaper if the Ofcom proposal gets through satisfactorily, but it isn't there yet. But I think it's one thing to sort of stick with that, but at a level of 20 million, I don't think just because it would be nice to do it necessarily makes it a priority.
So obviously you'll have to pick and choose as to which services you can actually migrate into a cheaper option. What's the process of doing that?
No, so not quite. Sorry, I thought the question you're asking me is can't I just make everything free? To which the answer is it's already costing me 20 million to have the free ones free. To have all the non-free ones free as well, you know, you're going to add on at least as much again. In fact, slightly more. I think we have 70 million 0845 calls and 30 million free calls. So, you know, you could be into sort of 40-50 million quid worth of cost down that track. That's not a sort of number which I can just say that would be nice to do. It would be nice to do, but I don't think it's practicable. So effectively the move from 0845 to 03 does mean that we are putting some money on the table because I have to pay half a pence a minute for it, but that will actually produce quite large savings for mobile customers themselves without too much further cost to the taxpayers. That seems to me a reasonable judgment to reach.
And I understand the point you're making. The question I was asking in effect was, when we look at the back of this report and we see the number of lines which we have within DWP, some of them which would make uncomfortable reading for anybody who's concerned about people having to pay to contact the department. But the question I'm asking is how will you be prioritising which one of those lines will be
one thing we haven't covered in this evidence today is that what the Cabinet Office advice and guidance even from 2010 actually said was no department should rely exclusively on 0845 numbers. So I have a network of retail outlets in job centres. You can walk into any job centre and make any call you like for free. All right. I do not require you to call 0845. You're perfectly able to, if you have a friend or a grandparent who's got a BT line, call me from there and it's actually cheaper. So I will offer you a call back if you ask for one. So there are all kinds of things which are actually, so I'll come back to that. So there are a number of things that we are doing, which means even this long list of 0845 does not mean I am locking people into using 0845.
If you ask for a callback, I mean, one of the issues I'm concerned about is people who have waited a long time, who then might spend quite a bit of time with a recorded message. It's all costing them. Helping them to know that they could be called back, particularly if they're under financial pressure,
then calling them back.
And then calling them back straight away.
So there's a series, I mean, in amongst the recommendations that NAO make, this is the one which I'm not sure I believe in. Because I think the idea that you would set up an organisation that's taken 100 million calls to basically say, well, we'll stop this call and I'll call you back and do it again, it's the wrong answer. The right answer is to actually stop this waiting period, answer the calls once and done, stop people having the volumes and move on to an 03 price bracket. I think that's the main game in town. I think if I was still swilling around in very expensive calls and endless waiting, then you might have a point. But actually, I don't think that's the right answer.
The person to your right is doing that.
I'm sorry?
The person to your right is doing exactly that.
I think she's trying to improve the same way that we are.
Yeah.
She's got to improve the
So the recommendation in C, in paragraph 23, you know, I am not sure that collection of, well, I tell you what, let's just keep offering everybody a free callback. Actually, I can't see how that works in a large organisation. I'd rather actually get the basic job done properly.
Okay, I've got 2-3 little questions, then we're done. The first one, we talked about tax credits a little earlier and your poor performance on that. What rather shocked me was when, in reply to a question, I think from Gita, you said that most of your phone calls come because of tax credits. Most of your phone calls are on that issue.
40% of our calls are from tax credits. What I said was, when you look at a single issue for which people call, then renew all of your tax credits, because that's the only way you can renew your tax credits.
I hear that, and it makes it doubly concerning that you therefore got that so wrong.
Yes, which is why I'm equally determined to make sure we get it right next year.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for this committee hearing that you do us a little note on both why it went wrong and what you're doing for next year to put it right, so that we can incorporate that in the evidence. That was the first thing. Second thing, really a question to Mr. Heaton. Transparency is hugely important, and if people don't know what they're paying, or unless they're really clued up about their package. And the transparency is two. So it's one, transparency to the customer. The other thing is, from the point of view of the taxpayer, it's transparency on whether or not government departments are getting the payback from the providers. Yeah. There's a worrying note somewhere in this report that Robert Devereux's department was too embarrassed to collect the 700,000 that they could have had due. So I just want an assurance from you that in your review, both transparency and open book with providers and transparency and clarity for customers will be part of the agenda that you'll be setting out.
You're right, as again Mr. Hurd said in that debate. I mean, there is a transparency failure here, and one of the things we're doing to sort that is when departments procure their contracts with the likes of BT and Vodafone, the big providers, under the new telephony framework directive, which we've led from the Cabinet Office, there will be more access to granular information about costs and charges and minutes and so on. So for us departments gathering data, there will be greater transparency from suppliers about the circumstances which we're charging and being charged. So that will help transparency. Your two specific questions.
Well, the one was for customers, so that they know there's much greater transparency with what they're paying with the calls.
Well, that of course is a function of a very fast-moving telephony market at the moment. So there's only some limit to it, some degree to which that's
within our... Well, you've got to keep updating it. I accept that, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a...
It's worse than that, I'm afraid, because I mean I've got a list here that was in 50 packages, and there's almost 50 different numbers down here. So I think the idea that we would play back to say if you were on this particular package with Orange, you're probably paying 22 pence.
Which is why simplicity has to be
if
the
we go for 0345,
but we don't control that. So the market determines what they will charge.
But nevertheless, there's a general thing. 0845 costs you more on a mobile line than using a landline. That's a general, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, that's sort of the limited transparency about relative costs.
That we can do.
You know, the different packages people have, obviously, you can always say subject to your individual packet. And the other transparency is the provider and the money they make out of this. That we as PAC and the taxpayer wants to know who's getting the income if 084 numbers are being used. And I think there is a demand in the report for much more open book contracts around this and transparency both for us in being the people who look after the taxpayers' interests and the taxpayer themselves in being able to see that.
I mean, that is something I would hope the working group can cover.
Pardon? You can cover.
Well, I think it's better than that, because I think that the feature of the PSN network contracts that we've negotiated make clear that needs to be transparent.
Okay, so you're giving us a commitment to that.
Yes, can I write on the precise detail of the commitment?
Pardon?
But I can write on the precise detail of the commitment, but yes, we'll offer you something like that.
Thank you.
Can I just go back to your little throwaway remark about being too embarrassed to collect 700,000? The report does record that we decided that we didn't want to have revenue for it. That revenue was worth 0.3 pence per minute. In the same year, we negotiated the same discount on the cost of the 0800 numbers I talked to Mr. B.
I think transparency around that would be extremely helpful.
So I think the report makes it look as if we didn't do something offsetting. There was something. I'm not sure it was quite as intelligent.
But the offsetting needs to be transparent.
Correct.
Clear on that point. That our understanding was that the revenue share was given up because you did not want to be seen to be taking money from benefit claimants. And the reason for the reduction on the 0800 rate was actually down to benchmarking information and not down to any sort of trade-off.
So we did the left hand, right hand, but the net effect was that we got the same out of one or the other.
Good. Now, I think we've ended this session actually with a lot of positive thoughts from you and intent around having a proper looking across government for policy which has some consistency, some form of mandation, particularly looking after vulnerable groups so they're not paying higher rate phone calls, better performance data, some sort of sanctions policy which is implemented so that people do this, and Robert Devereux is very helpful information that O3 will be an option around the new universal credit and PIPs, and your hopefully helpful note that you'll do on your actual performance. So that's very helpful. I've got one very final question to HMRC, which is around the Vodafone issue around today, which is that clearly there are concerns there on this deal. I just want some assurance that HMRC will be going through this deal with a tooth comb to ensure that the taxpayer gets the proper benefit under the law of the tax that is that Vodafone should pay on this massive windfall profits that they're making.
You're aware I can't comment on this particular taxpayer's tax affairs. What I would assure the committee, HMRC plays its full role in keeping very close to every large business to make sure they're paying the tax that's legally due. That's our role. And
you also look at whether or not there is not aggressive tax avoidance in this particular instance around using the Dutch-based company as a vehicle for filtering the profits.
I'm not going to be drawn into discussing this particular example, but our role is to make sure UK companies pay the tax that is legally due in this country, and that's what we do very closely with large and small business and individuals.
This is a heck of a lot of money, and it makes Vodafone's profits out of 0845 numbers from government look minuscule. Thank you.